This is Garis, Masculism MGTOW flyers, that is 2-3 page essays on the themes of masculism and MGTOW, written by and read aloud by Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. This is flyer number 551, entitled, "How can a man prove his wife/girlfriend has committed paternity fraud?" Description. Paternity fraud is one of the major gender crimes that women commit against men, manslaving a man for 2 decades of his life to pay for a kid that is not even his. This flyer discusses how a man can actually prove paternity fraud in a court of law and have her prosecuted. The flyer itself. How can a man prove his wife/girlfriend has committed paternity fraud? By Prof. Dr. Hugo de Garis. Email profhugodegaris@yahoo.com. Website profhugodegaris.wordpress.com. One of the main aims of masculism is to force women to grow up, to behave as responsible adults, who take responsibility for their own lives and decisions, who bother to get career competent educations so that they can be FIPs, that's financially independent persons, as adults, and not expect fluffy style to live off the labour and money of a man, thus manslaving him for decades of his life, the worst of all gender crimes by women against men. Masculists are pushing for the establishment of new gender laws that punish women for committing decades-long gender crimes against men. This flyer deals with the case of paternity fraud, which involves the mother lying to her man that the baby growing inside her is his, and that she expects him to help pay for it, even though she knows that it is not his or may not be his, if she had more than one different penis in her at the time of conception. Masculists have a hatred of women who commit paternity fraud, since it manslaves a man for 2 decades of his life, paying for a kid that is not even his, a hateful and horrific gender crime that masculists want women to be punished for. In flyer number 549, entitled, "How many years jail for a paternity fraudster?" I suggested that the punishment of such a crime should be about 15 years, that is, longer than the usual punishment for rape, which is about 10 years, because paternity fraud is a more serious crime due to its manslavery of a man for 2 decades of his life, paying for a kid that is not his. This flyer pursues this idea further, but is more practical than a discussion of masculist jurisprudence, in brackets, philosophy of law, as in that earlier flyer, because it asks the question, quote, "Just how can a man prove in a court of law that his wife/girlfriend has committed paternity fraud?" I begin with the definition of what paternity fraud actually is. The simple definition is that a woman commits paternity fraud if she tells her man that the baby growing in her is his, when she knows, or maybe knows, that it isn't. That is, she lies to him about who is the father, thus expecting him to help pay for the kid, which is not even his. A major gender crime, as seen by the masculists, and a very serious crime that might get the woman, the lying mother, a prison sentence of 15 years, a crime more serious than rape, given its 2 decades lasting repercussions, that is, the time over which the man is paying for the kid that is not even his. This flyer goes into details on how the man can go about proving in a court of law that his wife/girlfriend has lied to him that the kid is his. Obviously, he can't just tell the judge verbally in the courtroom that his wife/girlfriend told him that the kid was his, when a paternity test at the birth showed that the kid was not his, because the wife/girlfriend could just as easily say to the judge that she did not tell him and that her man is lying. So the man, the supposed father, needs to have some kind of scientific proof, perhaps a video clip of his woman saying to him that the kid is his. Imagine now how it will feel for the mother to have her man ask her if the kid is his, and he videos how she reacts. Her head will probably be racing ahead, thinking that if she says, quote, "Yes, the kid is yours," then if the kid is not his, then he will have scientific proof that she has lied to him, and hence he can then proceed to prosecute her for the very serious gender crime of paternity fraud. And she may then be convicted with a sentence of 15 years in jail, forced to work in jail to pay for her incarceration and for the cost of the kid, who will be with her in jail in the mother wing. I'm assuming here that the PARA, that's paternity rejection right, has already been legislated, so that the man is not forced into a paternity that he doesn't want. Actually, the 15-year sentence reflects the idea that the man does not have the PARA, so that a compulsory paternity would cost him 2 decades of his life to pay for a kid that is not even his. With the PARA, the consequences of her lying to him that the kid growing in her is his would be less severe than if the PARA did not exist. With the PARA, he only need fill in a government PARA form so that he is freed from any financial responsibility for the costs of the kid, especially if he knows the kid is not his. It is today technically possible to determine whether the man is the father before the birth. Such a test is called the PTT, that is the prenatal paternity test. Sorry, PPT. So if a man has suspicions that the kid growing in her is not his, for example, if he knows that his woman was rather promiscuous around the time of conception, for example, that she had another boyfriend that she claims she broke up with shortly before she got pregnant, then he can ask her for a PPT to put his mind at rest, and he videos her response to his request. If she says that the kid is definitely his, and later at the birth it is not his, he then has proof that she has lied to him, and he can use the video in a courtroom to charge her with paternity fraud. But what if he asks her to do a PPT and she agrees, and the PPT shows the kid is not his? Then he can use the PARA so that he is not forced to pay for the kid that is not his. Since having the PARA allows him to escape having to work for 2 decades to pay for a kid that is not his, the level of criminality on her part is less, since the consequences for him are less. But if there is no PARA, but there is a law against paternity fraud, then being forced to pay for a kid that is not his for 2 decades is a major gender crime, which deserves the 15-year sentence for paternity fraud for her, if she has lied to him about being the father. You can see that things are starting to get rather complicated. Perhaps with further thought, it might be useful to create a decision tree with a question at each branching node, and 2 branches heading down, one for a yes answer and the other for a no answer. If there's no PARA and no punishment of women for committing paternity fraud, then the masculists will become violent against the state, against the law, for not punishing this major gender crime that criminally forces men to pay for a kid that is not even his. This kind of massive gender injustice enrages and militarizes masculists who don't tolerate this kind of utterly callous behavior of women, who commit this major gender crime against men, who should be treated as gender criminals and be appropriately punished. So imagine another question node in the decision tree, which asks if there is an anti-paternity fraud law, but no para, then being forced to work for 2 decades to pay for a kid that is not even his is a major crime that deserves the 15-year sentence. But common sense says that if there is a para, then it needs to be accompanied by an anti-paternity fraud law as well. It doesn't make much sense to have the anti-paternity fraud law without a para. So for the rest of this flyer, I will assume that future masculists have changed society so that both the para and the anti-paternity fraud law exist, so that if the mother commits paternity fraud, she can be prosecuted. Then the 15-year sentence would be excessive, since all the man has to do, if he wants nothing to do with the pregnancy, is to fill in a para form and walk away from any financial responsibility for the kid if the mother chooses not to abort it and proceeds with the pregnancy. The fact that women have the MARA, that's maternity rejection right, yet men don't yet have the para, makes masculists murderously angry and violent, because it is such a blatant discrimination against men, treating men as cash machines and man slaves who exist on this earth to pay for women to have babies. So, what should an appropriate punishment be for a woman who is convicted of paternity fraud in a world that has both the para and an anti-paternity fraud law? I suggest it be about 6 months to act as a deterrent to women, to not lie to their man that the baby is his when he is not the father. Women who abuse their man like this deserve some form of punishment, even though with the para existing, it is not such a calamity compared to the situation in which the man is forced to work for 2 decades to pay for a kid that is not even his. So, getting back to how a man can prove in a court of law that his woman has committed paternity fraud, how can he avoid his woman attempting to avoid being convicted by her telling further lies? If he has her video telling him that he is definitely the father, yet either the PPT or a postnatal paternity test shows that he isn't, then he can convict her. But maybe she can claim that she had more than one lover at the time of conception and that she was mistaken that her man was the father. That is, that she was not lying, only mistaken. So the man, at the time of videoing, needs to be very explicit in his questioning of her while he is videoing, asking something like, quote, "Are you certain that the kid is mine? Was I the only sexual partner you had around the time of conception?" End quote. If she says categorically yes to both questions, then if the kid proves to be not his, either using a pre or postnatal paternity test, then he will be in a position to prosecute her for paternity fraud. He will have the video, the proof that she was lying. But what if she refuses to take a PPT, which involves getting a blood test of her blood to examine the DNA of the growing baby in the mother's blood? Then he can make the following statement during the video. He can film her refusing to take a PPT after he asks her to. He can say to her that if she is certain that he is the father, then she has nothing to lose if she takes the test, since the result will prove that he is the father. The fact that she refuses to take the test rouses great suspicion that she has something to hide. That is, that she knows the kid is not his or might not be his, if she had more than one man inside her around the time of conception. If she utterly refuses to take the PPT, then he can take out immediately, that is before the birth, a conditional para, in quotes. That is, if he wants the kid, if it is his, in capital letters, then he is prepared to help pay for the cost of the kid for the next 2 decades. But if the kid is not his, then he will take out the para at birth and not pay for the costs of the kid, so that she takes full financial responsibility for the costs of the kid. Since Masculus push very hard for the fipping of women, if his woman is a fip, she can then afford to pay for the costs of the kid. If she is not a fip, then the kid will be poor, because its mother is poor. So the mother then has the moral burden on her that she has brought a kid into the world that she cannot afford to give a good life to, making her an immoral, callous human being, the type of woman the masculists spit at. In today's world, there is no para, so men are forced into unwanted pregnancies, forced into manslavery for 2 decades of their lives, paying for a kid that is not even his, a massive gender crime that millions of women commit against men, and hence are hated by the masculists. The fact that women have the mara, yet men don't have the para, only fills the masculists with murderous rage. It's the most blatant form of sexual discrimination that exists, that motivates masculists powerfully to push for the legislation of the para. As a parting comment, you can see from the above that I am no lawyer, so my attempts at thinking the above issue through are rather amateurish, that needs a professional to do a proper job of it. But of course, that professional lawyer or gender politician who has a legal background would also need to be a masculist. So masculist ideas first need to spread more so that such experts exist, which is not yet the case today. That's July 2022. But masculist and MGTOW ideas are now spreading so fast that lack, that is, the lack of masculist jurists, the lack of masculist gender politicians, will soon be filled. If you are a lawyer and have only recently absorbed masculist and MGTOW ideas, then here is an opportunity for you to make a pioneering